Malaya achieved its independence without bloodshed thanks to the tireless work of the Malay right and its allies. Malayan independence was won in a violent and brutal struggle in which many, especially on the left, sacrificed their lives and freedom. The Malay right claimed that Malaya was not ready for independence. Independence was caused by the threats to British rule from the right, the left, nationalists, communists, and Islamists. It was achieved in 1948 and also in 1957, not to mention 1963, and of course, it was also never really achieved. All of these contradicting statements represent just a few of the many narratives describing the path to Malaya's independence. I'm your host David, and today we are going to look at the convoluted, acronym-strewn path of Malayan independence. This is the Cold War. A new year is a great opportunity to make changes in your life, but one thing I will never change is my love of learning. That is why I am so thrilled to be working with the sponsor of today's video, a rising star in the streaming world, Magellan TV. Magellan TV is the highest rated documentary streaming app on Google Play, and it offers the best value of any premium documentary streaming service for both its price and especially its quality. And the reason is that Magellan TV is all about the drama of real life. The lives of ancient pharaohs, critical battles of World War I and II, soldiers who fought in the Civil War, the battles for control of the British Crown, the Norman Conquest. Join us in watching History's Verdict, Hero or Villain, a series examining the lives of some of the greatest leaders of the First and Second World Wars. Magellan TV has the largest and best collection of history shows anywhere. Not only are there no ads ever, but your subscription always includes 4K. Click the link in the description and join us today. So, a bit of background before we jump in. Malaya was a British colony and rather complicated when it comes to how it was administered. There were the Strait settlements of Penang, Malacca, and Singapore, which were ruled directly. There were also the 4 federated Malay states, which were nominally Malay monarchies, but were ruled directly by the British in all but name. And then there were the 5 unfederated Malay states, which had each developed their own bodies of bureaucrats and state servants, whose members often had a British education, as well as family ties to the traditional Malay nobility. Malaya was, and is, also quite ethnically diverse. Alongside the Malay people, the colony had a large Chinese population throughout the colony, but especially concentrated in Singapore, as well as a substantial Indian minority. The Malays had more political power, especially in the sultanates, but were at the same time outcompeted economically and educationally by the so-called immigrant races, the non-Malays. Each of these groups followed different religions, and intermarriage was virtually non-existent. Okay, so under the Japanese occupation during the Second World War, the old British administrative structure was scrapped and replaced with a centralized military administration. When it comes to ethnicity, their policy was multifaceted. What that meant was that while the Japanese occupation was an intense and traumatic experience for any ethnicity, it was different for different groups. This was the result of a lack of Japanese personnel in Malaya, and they opted for utilizing existing government organizations. In practice, it meant seeking cooperation with the Malay sultans, providing employment to the Malay bureaucrats, and, as a side effect, politicizing common Malays. Indians were treated as a potential partner in a fight against Britain. The policy towards the Chinese, however, can be best described as punitive. It's no wonder that armed resistance against the Japanese in Malaya was waged primarily by the Chinese. When the British returned to Malaya, they opted for a solution that seemed rather natural. They chose to keep the newly centralized government, punish the Malay nobility by taking away their administrative powers. They imposed direct rule everywhere and rewarded the Chinese by creating equal citizenship for all ethnicities. Thus, in 1946, after some debate between the Colonial Office and Admiral Mountbatten, and just a bit of intimidation towards the sultans, the Malayan Union was born. Singapore was not included, by the way. This seemingly optimal solution especially for the British, would however be opposed by most of the political forces in Malaya. Now, what exactly were those political forces? Let's start with those on the right. Following the Japanese occupation, the Malay aristocratic elites had emerged stronger, at least relatively speaking. They received more career and training opportunities and were in closer contact with rural Malays. This group was best equipped to step into the political vacuum that was created by the Sultan's loss of power. They had a charismatic leader, Dato' On bin Jafar, himself the adopted son of the Sultan of Johor. In the spring of 1946, Dato' On and other Malaya leaders organized 2 conferences tasked with creating a national Malay organization and to plan a response to the British actions. Their result was the formation of the United Malays National Organization, or UMNO, and remember that name because UMNO becomes the party. UMNO's approach was not exactly anti-colonial, or at least not very radically anti-colonial. They were in a position of power, and altering the status quo would go against their interests. But the creation of the Malayan Union was exactly that, the altering of the status quo. UMNO's main concerns were the perceived violation of the rights of the Malay sultans and the granting of citizenship to non-Malays. Now, what about the groups on the left? First of all, and it will come as no surprise, the left was not united. There was the Malaya Communist Party, the MCP, because of course. It was dominated by membership from the Chinese community and failed to get any significant support from the Malays. Having fought the Japanese occupation, it was also armed and ready to wage a guerrilla war if necessary, a bit of foreshadowing there, by the way. There was also the Malay Nationalist Party, the MNP. It was somewhat of an umbrella group and included Malay communists, nationalists, and Islamists, all united in their goal of achieving full independence. Their leaders were middle class and commoners, including journalists, teachers, students, and the Islamic ulama. Given the range of ideological views within the MNP, it was seen as somewhat more moderate and approachable than other parties. So much so, in fact, that it was accused of being a tool for foreigners, communists, and non-Malays. The rightists accused it of being a hypocritical and double-faced party, allegedly fighting for communist interests in the name of Malay nationalism. And speaking of non-Malays, they had some parties of their own. There was the Malayan Chinese Association, led by Tan Cheng Lock. It was viewed as a moderate Chinese party, or at least one which was not communist. Indians had their own party too, called the Malaysian Indian Congress. The majority of non-Malays, perhaps surprisingly, did not support the new British colonial project, and the British could not rely on them in a struggle against the Malays. There were also several Islamist movements, such as the Pan-Malaysian Islamic Party, or Hizbul Muslimin, the Party of Muslims. Their goal was not just achieving independence, but also turning Malaya into an Islamic state. So, back to the British. From the very first days of the existence of their new Malayan Union, they ran into trouble. Protests erupted, and the inauguration of the new state was boycotted by the sultans. Those actions were organized by UMNO, which at that point was clearly leading the resistance. The British were naturally concerned. Just next to Malaya, a brutal anti-colonial war was raging in Indonesia, and any advance of the left in Malaya was perceived as an expansion of so-called Indonesian and communist elements. This posed a potential threat to British rule. The writing on the wall was clear. If they ignored the resistance led by UMNO, they would face resistance led by someone more violent and radical. Therefore, the British opted for what was, according to some, a plot to divide the Malay resistance. In July 1946, less than 4 months after the creation of the Malayan Union, the British created a, quote, political working committee to discuss a new political arrangement for Malaya. It was composed of 6 government representatives, 4 royal delegates, and 2 representatives of UMNO. The British realized that the right-wing Malays were not entirely opposed to their rule, and that some sort of Anglo-Malay alliance against the left was possible in exchange for certain concessions, as well as a promise of eventual independence. As a result, the future of Malaya was discussed exclusively with Malays. The committee worked for 6 months and produced a list of recommendations for the Colonial Office. The British would retain their centralized federal government and maintain control of Malaya's defense and foreign affairs, effectively retaining Malaya as a protectorate. At the same time, the sovereignty of the sultans would be guaranteed, and the legislative council would be weighted towards the Malays. Most importantly, though, the recommendations included a provision regarding Malayan federal citizenship. It would be granted to the subjects of the state's rulers, to local-born British subjects, and to the children of federal citizens. In practice, this meant the exclusion of Chinese and Indian populations. This is how the Australian Commissioner in Singapore, Claude Massey, described it. Quote, "There has not yet been time to gauge reactions to the Federation scheme, but it can safely be assumed that it will be the object of bitter attack from the non-Malay communities, who have lately shown resentment of the fact that negotiations have proceeded so far without their being consulted. In particular, they are bound to object to the citizenship proposals, which are rather more exclusive than had been hoped for." He was not wrong. The same day the list of proposals was released, the Council of Joint Action was established in Singapore, designed to oppose it. The meeting was attended by 75 delegates from multiple political parties, including the MNP and the MCA. Tan Chuen Lock was elected its chairman. It also received support from the Communist Party. A month later, the Council of Joint Action was convened again in Kuala Lumpur, this time called the Pan-Malaysian Council of Joint Action, PMCJA. Another coalition was created from that in order to unite Malay forces opposed to the proposals, called Pusat Tenaga Rakyat, or PUTERA. The two coalitions united, forming yet another acronym, one of the longer abbreviations of this entire series, PMCJA PUTERA. The proposals of the opposition, and for simplicity's sake I'm just going to call them the opposition, were the following. 1. A united Malaya including Singapore. 2. An elected central, state, and settlement legislatures. 3. Equal rights for all those who made Malaya their home. 4. Constitutional sultans who governed through democratic state councils. And 5. Special measures for the uplift and advancement of the Malay people. Now, the British at least claimed that there would be no final decision on the constitution without wide-ranging public consultation, and the activity of the opposition, supported by thousands large crowds at their rallies, did seem like a public backlash. However, the inclusion of Singapore in Malaya was unacceptable to London. At that time, as Britain was withdrawing from India and Burma, it was looking to maintain its influence where it could in locations east of Suez. This made Singapore an immensely important strategic possession. It also had a Chinese population so large that its inclusion in a union with Malaya would result in the Chinese outnumbering the Malays. Not only would this be a disaster for Britain's allies in the Malay right, but would also increase the perceived risks of Malaya being overrun by communists. Thus, with only minor adjustments to the original proposals, on February 1, 1948, the Union of Malaya was replaced, quite unimaginatively I might add, with the Federation of Malaya. The first major consequence of this new development was violence. According to some sources, the Malayan Communist Party launched an armed rebellion against the British in the middle of 1948. Others claim that the threat of such an uprising was exaggerated and was just a tool for the British to launch a crackdown against the increasingly popular leftist movements. In any case, this was the start of the events known as the Malayan Emergency. Now, we've already made a video on the Malayan Emergency, so if you haven't watched it or would like to watch it again, please do so. As a quick recap though, it was a counterinsurgency war fought by forces of the British Commonwealth against communist guerrillas with means that included chemical defoliants and the forced relocation of Chinese civilians into so-called new villages, which just happened to resemble concentration camps. The biggest benefactor of the emergency was UMNO. They were supported by the British, with government offices being used to promote the UMNO agenda in rural areas. Pro-government UMNO-aligned labor unions replaced leftist ones. Their most formidable opponent, the MNP, was banned along with the MCP, with its members having to choose whether to join the guerrillas, be arrested, leave for Indonesia, or support UMNO. As the insurgents lost ground, UMNO was increasingly viewed as Malaya's dominant political force. To quote the Colonial Office report for November 1948, quote, "The emergency has given the Malays an opportunity to improve their political position, which they have not been slow to take. They point to the leading part which the Malay community is taking in the fight against terrorism through the Malay Regiment, the regular police, and the special and auxiliary police. They contrast this with the behavior of the Chinese." End quote. This new development appears to have changed UMNO. According to the British accounts, its leader, Datuk On, was looking for rapprochement with what was left of the MNP and was willing to put aside their differences in order to strengthen the position of the Malays in the government. After 1950, UMNO changed its traditional slogan, Hidup Melayu, long live the Malays, to Merdeka, or independence. An idea to open the membership in UMNO was evidently discussed too. It led to an internal conflict, with the leader of the party, Datuk On, leaving its ranks and setting up a new party, the Independence for Malaya Party, the IMP. Once a dogmatic champion of Malay rights, Datuk On now adhered to a multi-ethnic platform. In the 1952 Kuala Lumpur municipal elections, UMNO, now led by Tunku Abdul Rahman, ran in a surprising coalition with the Malayan Chinese Association led by Tan Cheng Lock. What would become known as the Alliance would later be joined by the Malaysian Indian Congress, and it defeated the IMP spectacularly. In state elections, the Alliance won 226 out of 268 seats nationwide, and in the 1955 elections, it won a stunning 51 out of 52 seats in Malaya's Federal Legislative Council. The stage was set for independence. A conference was held in London to discuss its terms and provisions, and it ran rather smoothly. The constitution produced there was best described by Tunku Abdul Rahman in his memoirs. Quote, "It was of course not a perfect constitution, but we knew we were going to be in power with an overwhelming majority, and if any changes appeared necessary, we would amend the constitution. So why waste haggling over it at that stage? I just told my colleagues to accept everything that was proposed." End quote. The new constitution went into effect on the 15th of August, and on the 31st of August 1957, the Federation of Malaya became an independent country. But this would not be the end of Malaya's journey. Already in 1963, it would join the newborn state of Malaysia. The formation of the new union would result in an undeclared war against Indonesia and would also involve Singapore, Brunei, Sarawak, and North Borneo. We will talk about those events in a future video, as the process of how all of this came about is worth talking to in much more detail. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is The Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, I will leave you with the words of JFK. In the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal.